Shalom. My name is Cindy Kozierok, and I am the Director of Education at Beth Radham Congregation. And I'm really honored to be sharing my thoughts on this week's Parsha with you. This week is a double Parsha, Chukat-Balak, and it is jam-packed with action. It includes God's commandments regarding the red heifer, the deaths of Moses' siblings Miriam and Aaron, the critical moment where instead of following God's orders to bring forth water from the rock with words, Moses instead uses force, and the famous story of Bilam, his donkey, and his inability to curse the Jewish people in spite of a commandment to do so. By anyone's standards, that's a lot. So how to choose the topic of a commentary when there are so many options? Certainly writing about all of them would be too much, and choosing the most common would be, well, common. So for me, when I read a text, I'm always looking for a way to personalize it, to connect the words from the Torah to my own thoughts and feelings so that it's truly meaningful to me. I'm one of those people that watches everything that's going on in the background of a movie or a television show. While the action is happening up front, I'm looking at the flowers on the table at the side, or looking at the way the extras are glancing at each other while the main characters are speaking. It's like a window into the truth of the story, of what's really going on, not just what the director wants to draw my attention to. And so I found myself most drawn to the stories in the Parsha regarding the supporting actors of Exodus, Moses' brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam. As a team, these siblings work together, each using their own talents to guide the Jewish people out of Egypt and into freedom. None of the three would be part of the generation of Jews who would enter the land of Israel, and all three died in the desert. Miriam dies at the beginning of Chukat, and Aaron dies at the end. Let's read what the Torah says about each of their deaths. For Aaron, there are 6 full verses describing his death. Here is part of what God instructs Moses to do. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar and bring them up on Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. There Aaron shall be gathered unto the dead. Moses did as the Lord had commanded. They ascended Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar, and Aaron died there on the summit of the mountain. When Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last. Vayivku et Aharon shloshim yom kol beit Yisrael. All the house of Israel bewailed Aaron 30 days. For Miriam's death, the Torah dedicates half of one verse. It says, Vatamat sham Miriam, vatikaver sham. Miriam died there and was buried there. Is it just me, or do you notice some differences there too? It's not just the length of the passages that is unequal, but there are some key differences in the way their deaths are handled. Aaron's death is pre-planned, and he is given warning and explanation of how his legacy will move forward. Aaron's son will be his successor. He dies on the summit of a mountain, and he is mourned by the people of Israel for 30 days. A respectable death, befitting such an important person. And Miriam? Nothing. No successor, no mention of a family, no preparation, no dying on a mountain, and most importantly, no mourning. Nothing. On the face of it, this simply tells us that Aaron was just more important than Miriam, and therefore worthy of a more honorable death. And this is how I always read it too. After all, Miriam is only mentioned a few times in the Torah, despite being a prophetess. But let's take a look at a few of the things that Miriam actually did. The sages tell us that as a child, Miriam was responsible for the birth of Moses. According to the Midrash, after Pharaoh decreed the death of all firstborn males, Miriam's father, Amram, who was a leader in his community, divorced his wife, Yocheved, so that they would not take a chance of bringing a boy into the world. The rest of the community followed. It was Miriam, who the story says was only 6 years old at the time, who convinced her father that these actions were actually worse than what Pharaoh had decreed, because not only would there be no boys born, there would also be no girls. In this way, the people would surely die out. Amram listened to Miriam, and he remarried Yocheved. Moses was born after their reunion. It was also Miriam who watched over her baby brother in the basket, and more importantly, the one who had the courage and the intelligence to approach Pharaoh's daughter and ensure that Yocheved, his mother, would be able to nurture Moses during his youngest years, instilling in him the connection to his people. But most importantly, in my opinion, is Miriam's connection to water in the desert. In the verse that follows directly after the telling of her death, the Torah says, "V'lo haya mayim la'eda, vayikahalu al Moshe ve'al Aharon." The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. Rashi commented that it was not a coincidence that these two verses were so closely connected. From this he said that it was due to Miriam's merit that a well had followed the people throughout the desert, and they were satisfied with clean water all the while she was alive. As soon as she died, the water was gone, and the people were up in arms. According to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, it was Moses' deep grief over the loss of his older sister, to whom he knew he owed so much, that caused him to disobey God's instructions and strike the rock to bring forth the water later in the Parshat. Having relied on Miriam from even before his birth, Moses was absolutely bereft at the loss of this incredible woman. And he falls victim to his own human response to mourning, committing a fateful error. But I'm bothered by the lack of attention given to Miriam's death. I'm bothered that Miriam took care of the people throughout her life, and when she was gone, they cried out, not to honor her and mourn her as she deserved, but because they were thirsty. I've read a number of explanations as to why Miriam's death is handled the way it is in the Torah, particularly why she is not mourned. One of those answers says that Miriam represents all women, and therefore would never truly be gone, whereas when Aaron died, his like would never be seen again. Miriam's goal was the survival of the Jewish people. As the person responsible for life, then as long as life continues, so does Miriam's legacy. It's a nice answer, but I don't buy it. I think Miriam was simply taken for granted. Her people needed her, but they didn't value her. To say that she represented all women is like saying Aaron represented all men, which is, of course, ridiculous. She was a prophetess, a woman of great intelligence, foresight, and a direct connection to God. To pass off her death with a nice story about women and life is to diminish Miriam's legacy, and it is the epitome of a patronizing interpretation. I think we should all give Miriam the respect that she deserves. Shabbat Shalom.